All right, let's talk about that and this whole trial in Orlando, Florida, jury consultant and human behavior expert Susan Constantine, and in Magnolia, Texas, homicide detective Phil Waters. He's a legend from the Houston area. Good morning, good Friday morning to both of you. Susan, let's talk about the idea of identification and how if someone is given the basically is pushed a certain way, does it make a difference? How important is this idea of photo lineups and the way they're conducted because of human nature? If you nudge one way or another, it can make a massive difference.
Yeah, and I really think that's probably more in Phil's area because that's what he does for a living. But for me,
we're going to ask Phil.
Okay, so but what I'm looking at is there's 10 photographs, right? And it was kind of sandwiched in between. What was important for me, what really stood out was the fact that once he saw that photo, there was a physiological response. And when that happened, compared to the other photos where there was no responses, that was really visceral for him because that was bringing back a recall about this person when he saw him. So when you look at that lineup, I'm not sure about why it was sandwiched right in the center. I would assume it's so that the front end is not to give away and the end is not waiting until the end, but somewhere in the middle is where they put him.
Phil, what is your take on lineups, photo lineups? I mean, we think about in the movies where, you know, the guys walk in and there's someone behind the glass and that's how it's done. How does it really work, and what's the proper technique to make sure that no one photo is getting extra treatment, if you will?
Well, good morning, Ted, Susan, good morning. There are two types of lineups. You've got the live lineup, which is the one you described, Ted, and then we have the photo arrays, which is the one that was used in that courtroom. And I have conducted both of those types, many of them. The photo arrays in Texas especially have, there was legislation that gave us the direction on how to show photo arrays, because in the past there was a belief that when photo arrays are presented, that there is a bias by the detective in showing the photo arrays, and by implication, they can kind of direct the person looking at the photo array to the one they want them to pick. And we used 6-packs, we used this type of technique, but the way our department and most departments across Texas have started to show photo arrays is by taking these random photos, putting them in an envelope, and then having what they called a blind administrator. So a detective that is not even involved in the case is the one who actually shows the photos. And they're taken out of the envelope by the complainant, by the witness, and they look through them themselves. And then once they go through them, then they discuss whether they see anybody in there that they recognize as being associated with the crime. So it's a more impartial way of showing those photo arrays. And I'm sure at the time that this one was done, I don't know if they've changed that policy at that department, but you can't use photo arrays, identifications, as the sole piece of evidence. That's the main thing about photo arrays.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it makes sense to not have the detective, because both people in the room are human, right? You know, I mean, you can't have the guy that really, please pick 3, please pick, here's 3. Having someone who doesn't know the one that they want is the way to go. Susan, I want to talk to you about the defendant. He comes to court dressed the same way he did the first time around 3 years ago in these cardigan sweaters, and he seems like a very mild-mannered chap. He doesn't move much. He just sits there, and it's clear why. The defense doesn't want people to visualize him as being this guy that could take down 6 other men who are sitting on their porch by himself. What's your take on that? Does that work with juries? Does this visual aid, if you will, for the defense? Is this a good strategy?
Actually, it is. And let me share with you that in Seminole County at the courthouse, I developed a clothing center for defendants, and I would choose what they are going to wear for a specific case. So when you think about impression management, what I would do as a jury consultant, part of it is witness preparation, is selecting a clothing, a fabric that would bring out what is the positive side of that defendant. So they've made him look like kind of like a dad. In that the softer sweater, the cardigan, a regular guy, someone that's unassuming. And so all of that really does play in it. I mean, it's some people would find that it's not, cool to do that. But on the other hand, they all do. I mean, at every public defender's office and even state's attorney's offices, they have a clothing center where people donate clothing for them. So for him, you wouldn't have put him in a suit and tie. It wouldn't fit his image because he's an ice cream man. See, he's wearing the sweater, the light colored shirt. So he looks like he would be an ice cream man. So that's the whole point behind it. So yes, it really does make an impression.
Okay. Still with us in Orlando, Florida, jury consultant, human behavior expert Susan Constantine, and in Magnolia, Texas, veteran homicide detective Phil Waters. Phil, the pressure to solve a crime in this community, there were signs up for decades. They needed a break. Decades went by, and then finally they did get a break. The case was still not ironclad. The climate, if it used to be, and this is what happened in this case. The sheriff's department thought, oh yeah, Flores did it. Prosecutors say, we don't have enough. And this dance went on for years. Is that still the case where prosecutors are scared to go, some not scared, but reluctant to go to trial, and you have this battle going on? Has that changed over the years? And what's your overall feeling of the fact that they stuck with this and boom, they finally got justice?
Well, it is a tribute certainly to the detectives that stuck with it and finally got Flores where he needs to be. At the beginning of any investigation, it's always a challenge. You have to walk in there objectively and let the evidence lead you where you need to be. And sometimes, and that's what happened in this case, that you just hit the wall. Whether Flores was interviewed at that time, I don't know, but I'm sure he was. And he didn't confess to anything or didn't make any admissions that would lead them to be able to even put enough probable cause together to get a warrant for him or get him charged. And that's up to the prosecutors. The detectives present the evidence they have, and the prosecutors are the ones that decide whether or not they're going to charge this individual. And then they go into the future and start talking about the possibilities of having a successful prosecution. So whatever happened back then, 25, 26 years ago, was most probably that type of a situation where they just they knew who did it. And I've had those cases, but just didn't have that piece of evidence that was going to put them over the edge to get this person charged and tried and convicted.
Yeah, it's got to be frustrating from the law enforcement standpoint. Quickly, Susan, before we hit a break here today, the family, that opportunity to look him in the eye, they've thought for years that he's responsible. What is that going to be like for them?
Well, it's 25 years later, so I'm sure that they have kind of worked through a lot of those really strong emotions. But being able to be face to face with the person that had taken the life away from this family, this is their vindication. One thing that I'd like to mention in any sort of trial strategy when you're going back for a retrial is test those arguments. So prior to bringing a new case to trial, it's always important, I think, as a trial consultant, do your mock trial, test your arguments, opening, closing statements, key points of evidence to see what a mock jury, how they would perceive that information, see whether you're going to use it in the next trial.
Okay. Susan Constantine, Phil Waters, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Really appreciate your valuable time.